All right, I'm Jeff Nyquist. This is another edition of Friends and Enemies. Here we are broadcasting today at, what is it, the 11th of October, Alex? Um, this is the 11th of October, 2024. I'm Jeff Nyquist. I'm in the United States. My co-host, Alex Benesch, is in Germany. I call the show Friends and Enemies because it's the distinction that we often miss. What I find is that Americans and many people in Europe are confused as to who their friends and enemies are. This is a strategy of our enemies to make sure that we don't zero in on them, that we are always thinking, the Chinese are our friends, the Russians are our friends. But no, there is something called the socialist camp. It used to be called the communist bloc. It still exists. This past week, Russia's Duma affirmed that Cuba is an ally, that an attack on Cuba is an attack on Russia. Cuba is a communist country. We got communist North Korean troops fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Russians against the Ukrainians. China's a communist country. They've got units inside Russia and Chinese in Russian units fighting in Russian uniform. China is supporting Russia with all its economic might so that Russia can continue the fight against Ukraine. And of course, Russia's building up on NATO's border, ready to go in. And of course, Venezuela, which has a communist dictator named Nicolas Maduro, has and intermediate range ballistic missiles. If you follow Lee Wheelbarger's site, we found it on satellite pictures, images of the Caracas area just outside the city, Fort Tiuna. We've got a buildup in and a mobilization in communist Venezuela. And of course, the claim that military TV says that Russia has moved nuclear warheads into Venezuela, I would assume to be put together with those intermediate range ballistic missiles. People on my website, somebody said, that's not, that doesn't cut the mustard with me. They're not they've got, so it's a military news is a YouTube channel that gives some Russian news feed. It's what they're claiming, but I've had sources in Brazil telling me for years that they have moved nuclear weapons into Venezuela, and it's what I would do. And Putin has said that if we give the Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, that he will give nuclear warheads to Venezuela. So I think it's pretty much going to be a done deal with the nuclear warheads in Venezuela, and I don't think there's anything the U.S. can do about it. Just like when it was announced by the Pentagon in April of 2001 that North Korea had nuclear weapons, I think the announcement is going to come officially from the Pentagon. You're going to have a general give a briefing, and he's going to say Venezuela has nuclear warheads. I think it's a very big deal because our ABMs, our interceptors, are mostly in Alaska, a few in California. Well, that's the wrong place to intercept missiles coming from Venezuela across the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. They can hit Washington. Maybe they can hit New York, depending on the type of intermediate missiles that they have in there. And of course, the Russians, I believe it's the Russians that have helped the Venezuelans tunnel out that mountain by Fort Tiuna. There's a double track rail line. You can see it on satellite running into that mountain, then running under the city of Caracas back into an airport nestled away in a valley back in there. So whatever they're shipping into that mountain, they're bringing it by air. So, but the ideological confusion, people don't see the communist countries in Latin America, Africa, Asia, all rallying around Russia. They don't understand what this means. They don't understand what the more recent Chinese troop movements and air deployments towards the Yellow Sea, threatening Japan, what those mean. So, but yet we continue with this ideological war where you've got all these people on the alt-right and the right and the left pointing at each other, pointing at other countries, pointing at the Jews, and anybody except the Russians and Chinese being aligned together, the old communist bloc coming at us. So, Alex, so you've got a very interesting story out of Germany about a guy that was on the far right, a kind of a Nazi guy, Eric, I forget what you said his last name was. Ahrens, that's right. Tell us about this story. This is fascinating. How this guy got sort of an epiphany working with the Russians there on the neo-Nazi right in Germany.
Okay, so there's this guy. He's now 31 years old. So he was, during his 20s, he was trying to max out the extremism. He wanted to go all in and dedicate his life to the super right-wing cause. And then he made this sharp turn. He exited the right-wing extremist scene, and now he wants to bring it down, and he claims to have all this evidence. We just have to see if that really will materialize. However, this case is so educational. It tells us so much, so many useful things. So young looking guy, and he was. And he was trying to be the social media wizard. He wanted to be the propaganda czar. He was understanding the target audience. He was understanding social media much better than these politicians did, like the extreme right-wing politicians. He knew how to make a campaign. He knew how to use TikTok. And of course, we can speculate about Russian help with those TikTok campaigns for political candidates and the Russian help with their clickbots and their networks, their fake account networks and office buildings full of people clicking on these videos and liking them and sharing them to maximize the impact. And then, of course, a plethora of online influencers who just copy and paste what their leadership is saying. And so you can maximize the effect of a campaign. And he... All of a sudden, he declared it was all a big mistake. He figured out these people that he worked with were either crazy, completely immoral, traitors to Germany, and just lunatics. So just take your pick, right? And this is something that I had been warning about for a very long time. When I saw the rise of the AfD and they became more pro-Russia every day, it seemed. And he tells a bunch of interesting stories, and I think that one of the reasons he made that sharp turn was that he underestimated espionage to a very large degree. He didn't understand how professional espionage was. Eastern and Western espionage. He underestimated the Russians and he underestimated Western intelligence agencies as well. And that almost became his downfall. Now, at some point, he got set up by the London Guardian newspaper, as well as, I think it was a German newspaper or a political magazine, and one of those British groups that I think it was called Stop the Hate or Hope Not Hate, or one of these groups. So they set him up in a Greek restaurant in Athens about 2 years ago. He thought he was meeting with a rich person who was right-wing and wanted to spend money to get or help political right-wing parties, right? So seemed like a great opportunity for him. So he started to spill the beans, his convictions, how serious he was, and what he was truly thinking. And this was all captured by a hidden camera. And this was not the only instance of that happening. That happened a bunch of times. So he found out the hard way the problems that have existed in the extreme right wing for generations. And this is the same in the United States, right? If you see the smoke, you know there's fire, and then let's say the FBI or German authorities, they can take a closer look. And they can use the available tool set, and then they will film you. They will film you saying these outrageous things, what you really want to achieve, what your plans are. Maybe you tell them you are in bed with the Russians, or you will accept Russian control, or you will accept further wars conducted by Russia. This is also a major part. Before you go into the Baltics, before you go into Poland, before you take the next step as the Russian Communist Empire, you want to make sure that you have political backing in those target countries. And of course, Germany is also on the hit list. The Russians, they just want to have Germany, so they need to have political support in those target countries. For when the attack comes, or when an attack or a major attack is threatened, the Russians want to have their assets on the ground saying, let's make a deal, let's fulfill this list of demands from Moscow. And usually it will say something along the lines of, let's have a broad coalition, multiple parties that are pro-Russia and want peace and blah, 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 will form a new government. And then over a span of a few months, or maybe 1, 2, 3 years, this broad coalition government will then be completely taken over by Russia, or officially taken over by Russia. And then we're no longer a country, we are an oblast. And so this Erik Ahrens guy, he seems like a smart individual, like a decent IQ, but he certainly lacked a lot of knowledge, a lot of education about these matters. He made all the standard mistakes that you can make, especially as a young guy. You go full in, you commit. He said it was like a drug. It cured his, depression tendencies or his malaise. He felt energized, but just like with any drug, he needed a higher dose and a higher dose and a higher dose. So full spectrum, super right wing, and playing with all these other right wing governments out there. And now he says he has all the evidence. He wants to bring down the AfD. And he tells these stories. I mean, he said he was going to an Orthodox church in the middle of nowhere, kind of the center of the new right wing, where the new right wing elite goes to pray or have rituals. And because he was a rising star, so they invite him into this church, they get him down to these catacombs or the basement or this crypta, this crypt, and they do this ritual, and he was observing it, and one of the most powerful right-wing people there, according to Ahrens' description, at least, this powerful dude was just throwing himself on the floor as if he was a Muslim praying, and just totally be in the moment, totally enjoy this ritual. And this was described as Byzantine, meaning kind of ancient, not really something German at all. So he thought he was in the most German circles you can imagine, the top of the top, and then he watches these old Greek mystery cult type rituals, according to his description. And then he talked to the priest. He said, okay, so you're the top guy. The others are getting their ideas from you. And mind you, those are the kind of circles that love Alexander Dugin and these Russians. So you make the ideas. What do you want to see for Germany? What kind of a Germany you want to see in the future? What's the goal here? And this priest supposedly said to him, I want a German agrarian state, so no industry. It would be best if it was a feudal state. So we go back to the Middle Ages because that's cool. And this is kind of like this was one of his breaking moments where he started to question everything, and he saw other politicians that became powerful, and they made some statements to him that sounded extremely hedonistic, and this came from people who had champagne taste but only beer money. Oh, kind of an interesting case, and what we can absolutely say for certain is that a lot of people are way in over their heads when it comes to espionage, and even if a Western agency gets to you first, right? Even if you're a bit cautious and you don't want to completely sell out to the Russians, and you understand it's a KGB run superpower, even if a Western agency gets to you first, which is apparently easy to do, this Western agency, especially the German ones, because that happened again and again, these Western institutions. These Western institutions, they're already infiltrated by the Russians. So if they get to you first, the Russians automatically get to you as well. And so what do they do with that information, with that they have gathered, right? They can destroy the individual, they can destroy an organization, or they can protect an organization and say, not be overtly threatening and say, we got you by the you-know-whats, we're gonna, you serve us now, but it's more like a friendly tone, okay? We can protect you to a certain degree, but you have to give us something as well, because we're your friends. And just a very interesting case, and it runs parallel with so many other cases that we have seen in the past, and that makes the friends and enemy distinction so complicated, because it's the fundamental job of covert operations, subversion operations, to confuse people about that, not just in individual cases, to say that guy is bad even though he's good, or saying that guy is good even though he's bad, but to distort the method that people are using, to distort the way they're judging friend from enemy. Because if your method is bad, you stand zero chance. And the Russians, they make sure they know, with their espionage, they make sure they know who's an enemy to them and who's a friend to them, and they keep lists.
That's the key. Yeah, that's the whole key. How can you fight an enemy that you can't identify? See, this is so basic. And to understand, how can you understand the mind of an enemy when you can't even name your enemy? When you're saying, it's the Jews are the enemy, when it's Moscow and Beijing. Israel's the biggest threat to America. You hear this nonsense. And so this Eric Ahrens had an epiphany. Do you think he's given up his Nazi views because of his experience with the Russian Orthodox and this or Greek Orthodox ritual, and his sort of seeing behind the curtain that it's not the Wizard of Oz?
Well, obviously, there's speculation now concerning his motives. He now says things that make him sound open to the left. We're not sure yet, or I'm not sure yet if he wants to recreate himself as somebody from the political middle, or somebody who can talk to most people, or if he's going to say that he's turned into a leftist or whatever. We don't know that yet, but there's so many recorded cases. There was, for example, there's a collection of such cases in Anton Chekhovtsov's book, Tango Noir. So you see a lot of organizations, especially or German and French organizations, extreme right-wing groups, that people have forgotten. Most people don't even know existed. Even right-wing people don't know the right-wing history, and so many cases.
Splinter groups.
No, even some more substantial groups, and it always worked the same way, and there was always new people coming in, and they were freaked out. They found out that leading people in this right-wing movement or extreme right-wing movement were totally gay, while being super anti-militant gay in the public, or talking about traditional family values, but then they're super gay.
And doesn't that sound like an intelligence op when you've got super militant, you've got gay people being militantly anti-gay.
And we have data. Like and we have data on some Russian networks that survived to this day. I mean, even Vladimir Putin was personally involved when he worked for the KGB alongside the Stasi in East Germany. Putin was personally involved in some of these operations. I mean, they were co-running some leftist groups, but they were also infiltrating right-wing groups. And there was one, I think it was the infamous Kühnen group. There was also all sorts of craziness going on. The Russians had their people in these groups and bringing them further up and up and up.
This is back in the 80s? Back in the 1980s?
Yeah, like the 80s and the 90s. And then some people who became suspicious, they started to get very sick and died. Accusations of leading people being gay, and information about Russian assets running sort of the underworld, the underage brothels and some networks, and trying to get further into
we're talking about pedophile networks in Germany.
Yeah, sure. And we have data on this, on Putin's personal involvement with some specific people from the German extreme right wing. And I mean, it was like, I mean, this is even a story that Ahrens is telling now. I mean, this is at this point totally unconfirmed.
And this is when Putin was an active KGB colonel, lieutenant colonel.
Oh yeah, sure.
Operating in Germany.
Yeah. And now we got this Ahrens guy, and he says that he was invited to this Austrian group, the Identitarians. They're kind of infamous for being these. It's like the extreme right wing. An extreme right-wing group that tries to appeal to young people, and they have some activist techniques which seemed like they're straight from Greenpeace or something. And they always wanted the attention, but it never really worked that way. Never really worked that way for them. And so he says that he was invited to this group, and the leader was very eager to meet Erik, but then when they personally met, he says the leader was very disappointed, and then Ahrens says that this leader was surrounded by these young, slender guys, these very young, thin activists, and so he got a little bit paranoid about the whole thing. And I mean, of course, if we look back in history, the NSDAP was full of gays. There were a lot of gay people. It was not just the ones that people remember.
The brown shirts was the SD.
Yeah, Röhm was a famous case, but there were many, many more. And even when the purge happened against Röhm and a lot of others, we have a lot of information about that and a lot of analysis in Lothar Machtan's book about this. And he described
the book.
Yeah, and hang on a sec. This is...
And let the people see. This is Lothar Machtan's book, The Hidden Hitler. And this got a lot of testimony on Hitler's sexuality, being that he was bisexual or gay. And it's a very interesting book. This is a quite a job that he did in this. And I lost it in my move from California, but I had to get a copy of it since you brought it up before. And there's some incredible things in this book.
Yeah, because it ties into espionage. Because when the purge happened, there were a lot of instances where they were looking for. I mean, Hitler and his guys, they were looking for information that others had about him or against him. And there's documented evidence that quite a few people were absolutely certain they had very, very compromising information, photographs, letters, everything, handwritten letters, compromising information about Hitler. And some of people used this information as leverage, or they had a dead man switch. They sent this information into other countries, neutral countries, and had contacts there. In case anything happened to them, this information would get published. And also there's an instance in the book by Mr. Machtan where it says that a leftist researcher, I think he was the famous sexual science researcher, kind of a leftist, he had information collected and sent that to Moscow. There's a strong possibility that some of this information or similar information leaked to the British early on, leaked to the Americans at some point. And this was an issue. And in the book, it goes further and further back into Hitler's past, speculating and assigning probabilities. He's explaining that apparently Hitler was very familiar early on with Munich, which was like a center for gay people, in Berlin, and he probably met some of these later powerful Nazis early on, especially the military guys. They had some early contact because it was a small community. And there was the question of snitching, because being a homosexual was illegal in different countries for a very long time. And so the police were actively looking for gay people, and then they figured out that gays in high places may be a security risk. There was one high-ranking Austrian officer who sold all the military secrets to Russia,
That's
a gay
before
officer.
World War One. That was before World War One.
A gay officer, and that's when the public got concerned, everybody got concerned, and this is when some more sophisticated spying happened in the gay communities, trying to recruit some young gay people and trying to get them into contact with more powerful circles and seeing who's gay and who is who's doing what.
Because you end up within aristocratic and military and political circles, you end up with an elite secret. It's almost like a secret society of homosexuals, a kind of lavender mafia that existed in Germany, that existed in Austria. And of course, you would, if you were the government concerned about this, you would recruit young gay men to infiltrate that group and identify them and find out what they're up to.
Yeah, and so
this is what you think, or there was an author who wrote about this who thinks that that's what Hitler was before the war, that Hitler ended up becoming an agent.
A part-time spy, because we know that Hitler used to draw. He was an artist, but he only sometimes worked when everything else failed, and
that's kind of a gay thing, isn't it, to be a bohemian type artist?
Yeah, I mean, even when he was a young teenager and when his crazy father was still alive, I mean, the father said, "Over my dead body, will you become an artist?" And then, of course, the father died very quickly. And Hitler was free. His mother was paying for him, and he was able to.
His mother spoiled him. His mother was very soft on him. They'd give him what he wanted.
And he tried to become a professional artist, but he just wasn't a hard worker in the classical sense, and he wasn't talented enough. And when he used up all the money that he inherited, and he was broke, he had a place to sleep, but then he would always spend every night somewhere, and that was a big mystery. He was
primping himself and going out.
Yeah, he was.
Every night.
Even when he suddenly escaped from Austria for some reason that he never was willing to explain, and he went to Munich, and he got an apartment. Even his landlord was saying, "Okay, this is kind of odd. Here's a young man, working age, who he comes home in the morning." Coming from who knows where, goes to sleep, wakes up in the early afternoon, starts grooming himself, seriously grooming himself, his skincare routine and all the stuff that men didn't do back then, grooming himself to a large degree, and then in the evening Hitler would go out again and disappear and then come back in the morning, and this went on again and again and again and again and again. And so this issue became bigger and bigger when he became a politician in the 20s, and he surrounded himself with men and more men, and Rudolf Hess and his drivers. He had a very specific team of personal assistants and drivers, very close.
Now, Rudolf Hess was an odd guy. There's this speculation that he was gay.
Sure, I mean there was the Nazi elite was talking about it, and there was even one case. I think it's also in Machtan's book, and it's not the only place we can find information about it. I think one of his drivers or his personal assistants conspired with this girl to expose Hitler's secret unless he. Expose Hitler's secrets unless he pays money to the girl and lets the girl go, and this all ended with the girl ending up dead. And so it became a bigger and bigger issue, because when you gain power, you need powerful people to get power. It's not like some people think when they watch these mainline documentaries that he was just a good talker and the situation was just in his favor and whatnot. But you need powerful people to get more power, and he would always move from the next guy to the next guy to the next guy to gain more power.
Well, it's interesting that this thing about him being a spy. I mean, if you look at his open biography, Hitler was quite clearly a spy for the German army after the war.
Absolutely.
And he was tasked with infiltrating the new political parties and groups that were forming. He'd infiltrated the communists. was supposedly, according to one account, was fingering the communists that needed to be executed during the period of the Red Bavaria, and of course was supported by Ludendorff. He was the creature of General Ludendorff, and what people have to understand at the end of the war, Ludendorff was the most important German general at the end of World War I.
Yeah, and so the question of leverage arises when you have power and you need to groom somebody else. Somebody else is asking you for help and more power. So you are being asked to invest, right? You invest with your money, your name, your connections. But how do you protect that investment? You need leverage. You need to have control, because the more you invest, the more you can lose. And so this becomes a growing issue. And even just the infighting, I mean, it's very well described in the book. It wasn't like what people were told it was, this tight-knit group of hyper-nationalists, brothers in arms and super loyalty, the super elite. These were just very dysfunctional human beings trying to destroy each other, damage each other, just collecting compromising information on each other and trying to use that.
I should just mention psychologically, homosexuality was once rated as an identity disorder, like narcissism. Related to narcissism, in Jungian psychology, it would be related to having the projection of the shadow, and all of the pathological manifestations that comes along with, and not knowing oneself, and being sort of a self-hatred going on inside, being worked out.
And we have so much data on other dictators of that age and past ages, dictators who would be so hedonistic, they would get the girls and have them shipped to them, have their people find the most beautiful young girls around the country and then just coach them and have them shipped to them, and just bring them more girls and more girls and more girls. But not with Hitler. He was completely not interested in women the whole time. I mean, he had a sham marriage, and historians still take that seriously, but there was nothing else really. I mean, when he was a rising political star, everybody who had power wanted to get their daughter to marry Hitler. But that never happened. He had zero interest, absolutely none. Even when
he pretended some interest on when you read his history, and it's a different story is told. Okay, you've got a number of, if you read all the memoirs of the people around Hitler, and of course, we're getting sort of sidetracked from the way homosexuals are used today, because it's pedophilia is part of it, and then having if you're a pronounced militant anti-gay and you're pretending to be conservative and you're really a homosexual, that is compromising. But other than that, it's a slightly different game now than it was then. But you've got some people that were close. Christy Schroeder was the senior secretary in Hitler's secretary pool. She wrote a memoir. You've got his valet, SS bodyguard, who wrote a very interesting memoir, and of course Putzi Hamstengel, who was a half American, half Bavarian, knew the Roosevelt family, went to Harvard, if I remember right, and was an early supporter of Hitler and was a defector from Nazi Germany. He had been Hitler's foreign press secretary until he kind of fell out with the Nazis. And Hamstengel's book, I mean, I've read it like 4 or 5 times because it's so interesting, because he knew him earlier before Hitler transitioned to the Führer personality. So he was there to see Hitler kind of forming as a political personality, as the image that Hitler projected. And he kind of, he talks a lot in his book about Hitler's sexuality, the ambiguity of it. And Hitler would pretend to be fascinated by Hamstengel's wife, to be in love with Hamstengel's wife. And he would rave about it. And Hamstengel's wife would say, he's a neuter. He's a neuter. He's not really interested in women. This is a pretense. This is a fake. This is a sort of a fake gallantry. And of course it goes all to the deception. And people, historians will make the argument, no, this thing, Mockton's book, it's all nonsense because Hitler had girlfriends, he kissed women, he had Eva Braun. You've got his valet's memoir saying, well, they had sex. Hitler had sex with Eva Braun. Mockton has a quote, though, from Eva Braun telling the hairdresser that he's really not sexually that interested in me. You remember that part of the book. He's got a quote there. So is this a game? Is this a pretense? Is this a cover for Hitler? And why is it hidden? Why are these details about Hitler's sexuality hidden by the Allies themselves in the official biographies? So it seems to me there's a lot of secrets here, intelligence secrets, that end up becoming a kind of cover in the official history, where the historians themselves, some of the early biographers, by the way, of Hitler, some of the big biographers were British intelligence people. Trying to think of the name of the big one that wrote one of the first biographies of Hitler.
No, Kershaw.
No, not Ian Kershaw. He's German. But I think a lot of the basic information on Hitler that was sort of initially put forward by the British officers that investigated Hitler's disappearance and come up with all this biographical information, I think there was disinformation in that. And you can maybe comment on it. Trying to remember the name of this early historian. He was one of the guys that weighed in on the fake Hitler diaries that were supposedly found some 20-something years ago. That became a bit of a scandal. There's always been this, what happened. Most of the people, it's interesting, that were around Hitler, some of the people closest to him, were captured by the Russians and were in captivity and would have had to have signed, agreed to be under obligation to Moscow in order to just get out of there. And so how much is distorted in the biographies that they presented? So Mockton is, people are going to argue about this, whether Mockton's book on Hitler's sexuality is valid. But I think Hanfstaengl is decisive because he knew Hitler personally. He was part of Hitler's most intimate circle at the very beginning. And have you read Hanfstaengl's book?
No, I haven't read Hanfstaengl's account. Just quotes other people quoting him. But usually we would expect, the usual history of a person, with girlfriends and pregnancies and unwanted pregnancies and. Just even before he was famous, you would expect girlfriends, but his old friend, from the old days, before Hitler was known to anybody, August Kubizek, I think was the name, was a musician, and it's likely they were a couple and they shared an apartment. His friend back then, he confirmed that Hitler was a very handsome man back then, very handsome,
young
and the girls were interested in him, but he did not give a flip. He didn't care.
Well, he did supposedly. If you read Kubitschek's book, Hitler was in love with this beautiful girl, in his book. You've read his book, right? You remember this part. Now, was that invented? Because yeah.
I mean, the thing is with the quantitative analysis here. We should be certain he was hetero, and there wouldn't be any question about it. But just the fact that there was this confirmed big gay circle in the NSDAP, and this was a
Yeah.
major factor in who got promoted, who made a career.
Oh, there's, this is the question of bisexuality. You know the story. If you read Heinz Linge's biography, he was the valet SS bodyguard, very close, one of the closest people to Hitler, and Schroeder's the lead secretary, the senior secretary, I think she was. She wrote, she got cancer, I think in the early 80s, and before she died, she wanted to put all her memories on paper. Very important to read these accounts because they knew Hitler. They worked side by side with him for years. And what they both say is that he got a woman pregnant during World War I, a French woman, and that he had a French son. And they both discuss this in their memoirs, that when France fell in 1940, Himmler went to search for this woman, and Hitler wanted to meet his son, his French son. And Christa Schroeder later met the son and said he had Hitler's walk. She could see that he was Hitler's son. She believed this. This is very controversial. It's very funny how many of these details aren't in a lot of the biographies of Hitler. They just
because these books, they focus just on his Weltanschauung, his view of the world, but they don't want to treat him like a person that could have been recruited or got himself entangled, because people have to remember, even before the start of the Soviet Union, because then of course the Soviet espionage became a huge problem for Germany, massive problem for Germany. But even before the Soviet Union, you had a lot of socialist hardcore networks on German soil and in Austria and other places. So there was already communist networks everywhere, and they were trying to infiltrate everything. They were infiltrating the military circles. And it seems to me the British intelligence must have been aware of this. You'd mentioned this before. And this is all in the setting of the pre-war Europe before World War II. I should mention another aspect of Hitler's biography that puzzles me, why this is cut out of all the mainstream accounts. Because if I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure this out, this intelligence angle, by reading these biographies of the people that were around Himmler and Hitler. Two in particular, Himmler had a Finnish doctor. He was a masseuse. The man, I think his autobiography, which is written by someone else, his biography, The Man with the Magical Hands, I think is the English title. Great.
You remember him?
Vaguely.
But he was trained by a Chinese expert in Chinese massage. He was technically a doctor. I think he had some medical training. He was actually a German who acquired Finnish citizen by fighting in the Finnish Civil War. And so he lived mainly in Germany, and he didn't like the Nazis, but he became a kind of quiet activist. He became a sort of personal advisor to Himmler, because Himmler did these horrible things, but Himmler was like a normal person psychologically. Hitler was his hero. And so when, for example, he recounts in his book, when Himmler got the order to begin the Holocaust from Hitler, he would get these stomach cramps. He would be disabled by stomach cramps. It was a neurotic, psycho, all the evil things he did. Himmler would get these horrible psychosomatic, somatic illnesses, which is around his stomach. And so the only relief he could get, this Finnish doctor would give him, and he became his confessor. Now, a lot of people dismiss this biography, but I don't, because if you look at the biography, and it's published in English under The Labyrinth, of Walter Schellenberg, the head of SS Foreign Intelligence. Before that, he was in counterintelligence. He was a protege of the head of the SD, who was assassinated in Prague.
Reinhard Heydrich.
Reinhard Heydrich, very evil man, and he says he's an evil man, with a beautiful wife, of course. And it's incredible stories of how these people behaved in private. It's very important to read that. But what's interesting is that both the Finnish doctor and Schellenberg, and I think there's one other source on this, they were close to Himmler. They were maybe the two closest people to Himmler professionally, the Finnish doctor and Schellenberg. And they both recounted this story that behind Himmler's desk, behind his desk was a safe in which he kept a 27-page medical dossier on Hitler that said that Hitler, it was a medical dossier from late 1937, saying that Hitler had the early signs of the onset of syphilitic paralysis. And that, of course, this is when Hitler acquired this doctor who was he was personally rather dirty. People hated him. Do you remember? His name is escaping me now, but this doctor.
There were multiple ones.
Yes, Morel. Yes. Morel specialized in treating syphilis, and he treated it with, I think it was strychnine. But you take small doses of a poison. It's like chemo. It's a kind of chemo, in the sense that you take a poison that keeps the syphilis at bay, because it keeps the syphilis from advancing, or it slows it. Because basically, when the symptoms first appear, you got about 5 years before you can get, your brain is seriously compromised. And so it's suddenly at the end of 1937 is when Hitler has this military conference, which is rather controversial. There's some notes from it saying that he's going to start a war. The military has to get ready. And then in 1938, you've got the Anschluss in Austria. You've got the push on Czechia with the Munich conference, and Hitler's trying to build this Grosser Deutschland, this Greater Reich, and he keeps telling his doctors. You go to the regular biographers, and he goes, "I don't have much time." He's worried about his health. A lot of the people say, "Oh, he's worried about cancer," but if you look at this testimony from Schellenberg and this Finnish doctor, no, he knew he had this syphilis, and Morel had the trick, the poison that he was taking, and that they called him his gas pills, because he got very serious intestinal disorders. I mean, people talk about the bad gas he had and the absolutely toxic farting, and of course people make jokes about that, but it was because he had this syphilis. I think it's true. And I don't know why the mainstream historians avoid it like the plague. They won't discuss it because, of course, it goes to Hitler's madness. You know that paranoia is one of the symptoms, the syphilitic psychosis. There's a psychological abnormality that gets worse, right?
Yeah,
isn't
it typical? Isn't it typical? I mean, people. I think people are familiar with this principle from everyday work at a corporate job. I mean, you get this impression that oftentimes incompetent people get promoted because higher up managers don't feel threatened by those guys being promoted. They just want people to follow orders, don't think, don't create any trouble, don't, fight for the even higher position, just don't be a threat. And when we see that in the corporate world, we see that in show business, when, let's say, a huge corporation, they want to find an artist who is pretty enough, who has a voice, who can function, but doesn't have that much talent. They want artists who can't make it on their own. They want artists who cannot write a hit song, because then the corporation has full control. So they will pick the yes men, they will pick the less talented people and make them super famous. Same thing in Hollywood, where we have recent scandals of people being entangled in all sorts of scandals and deviant behavior in secret networks. The music industry is full of these horrific stories. It's always about building someone up who cannot achieve anything by themselves, and investing in that person and leveraging that person, having full control
building
over
them
that
into
person.
a kind of a god. Yeah.
And
The Finnish doctor was Felix Kirsten. I just remembered the name. Felix Kirsten, and it's The Man with the Miraculous Hands is the book if anyone wants to read it. But this is the thing. Why in Hitler's biography are these in the mainstream biographers? Why is this skipped over? Because it's not just one source we have.
Because there's like this do not enter sign, this do not touch sign when it comes to Hitler, other high-ranking Nazis, and the espionage topic. So who was spying in Germany and who had leverage over Hitler and his people? The Russians.
And there's a communist Soviet angle on this.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. And the British the British were also heavily involved, but the British were also infiltrated by the Russians, which is like this insane, crazy, dangerous loop situation that probably existed back then. And so this is something that nobody wants to touch because it opens the worst can of worms that we need to open, because it's helpful for a current situation. Because as I explained earlier, with this guy who tried to become the biggest right-wing hero, and he found out it's all crazy and infiltrated and insane. This is what everybody would be getting into if you're a passive supporter.
Because the whole Nazi thing at the beginning had this communist infiltration and manipulation of the Nazis, manipulation of Hitler. It was Stalin that saw Hitler as the icebreaker of the revolution. It was very controversial, but Viktor Suvorov, the GRU defector, wrote 2 books about Stalin's manipulation and relationship with Hitler. And this element of homosexuality and potential blackmail that Hitler was involved in counterintelligence before the war, it all kind of
and Hitler was not even the prime candidate for that role, so to say, because there was a fascist underground before the takeover. There were capable, very cold, very professional Germans around. They had a military background. They had a sophisticated background. They had a more powerful family background. There was like the organization Consul, terrorist groups, specific targeted assassinations, professionals, disciplined, rational, cold professionals, and they were trying to rise up. They were trying to get the money and get the support, and they were presenting themselves. They were pitching themselves. They pick me. I'm the super guy. Look at all the stuff that I've done, and I'm smart. I'm capable. Blah 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 blah. But these guys were not picked. Adolf Hitler was picked, and
I think the left had something to do with that. Look, I wanted to mention this, and this goes to. I mean, understanding this helps us understand what's going on with Trump, maybe, because we've got these figures who are helpful to Russia, that talk about aligning with Russia, and they're on the right, and they're super patriots. Whatever, you got MAGA, you got. I'm not saying that Trump is Hitler, but there's this relationship, with the Russian side that people on the left have noticed with Trump, and of course with Hitler. And of course the reason to hide it is to hide this Russian connection. And I should point out, to back up what you just said, look, people forget Hindenburg, who was the other great German general of the First World War, who won the first great German battlefield victory in the war. Hindenburg was the president of Germany, of Weimar Germany. And he was the one that appointed Hitler chancellor. We forget this. And Hindenburg was a conservative. He was a German aristocratic military officer, von Hindenburg. And we forget that the German general staff, even though, with Versailles, the German army was forced to be small, and their traditions were under attack in Germany. This horrible treaty was imposed on them. These German generals wanted their country to be great again. And I think you're right. They would have preferred someone other than Hitler. But the communists and the socialists would always block them. So they could never really get control of the state. So they saw Hitler as their instrument. a bad miscalculation there, because Hitler basically was able to defy and outmaneuver people. And so when they created this kind of coalition, Hitler was supported by the conservatives and by Hindenburg in January 1933, when they made him chancellor. And this was, people say, oh, Hitler won an election. No, he got appointed by a conservative president,
and it's always
by a German
about
general.
and you were always, Hitler learned that from a very early age onwards, that you needed to get to the next level by meeting the right people, getting into their circles, offering your services to the next higher person.
Yeah, and Hitler even pretended that he wanted to bring the monarchy back.
And at some point, when you rise up the ranks and then you need something done, you need a decision that benefits you, other people who have the power to make a decision, a vote in parliament or whatever, or an emergency measure or whatever, other people who have power to make that decision, these other people are also members of networks. They rose up the ranks by being part of ever new circles and networks and being compromised. So there's only a very limited number of individuals who pulled strings, who were in control of these networks. And as I said, there had been very powerful socialist networks for decades and decades, and they had learned how to do the spy game. Even in the 1800s, they learned the spy game. They learned this German psyche from the left-wing psychiatrists that became very sophisticated in the 1800s. And so that was already there. And then, of course, when the Soviet Union happened, this espionage problem multiplied. So back then or today, if you get into, let's say, the extreme right, and that's, of course, not the only group that has this problem, if you get into these groups and you support people and you give everything to this group, or you're just a passive supporter, you have to realize that these circles are massively infiltrated, and there are networks inside there that are very old and very, very professional. And now you mentioned Britain, and I think the Russians, and especially the Soviet Soviet Russians, I think they had a British backdoor into Germany, because of the some of the powerful British families, and of course
Kim Philby also was in MI. Yeah. He was pretending to be a right-winger, even though he was a Soviet agent. Yeah. And he would even posture during the Spanish Civil War that he supported Franco.
And don't forget, I want to remind people that some experts, very few actually, some experts have commented that the defeat of Germany in World War I turned into possibly the biggest intelligence disaster that was even possible. Because when the German state broke down, counterintelligence broke down. You had no reliable structures anymore, and you had this inpour of people that fled from Russia. They fled the communists, but could you really trust them? Maybe they were communist spies, and there was all kinds of people.
This was a big problem. And when you end up, and this comes out in Germany when you have, of course, Reinhard Heydrich, who was a protege of Admiral Canaris. Admiral Canaris was a famous German spy. He began as a naval officer on a German light cruiser that was involved in the Battle of the Falklands and had gone around Chile and actually defeated, it was one of the rare German naval victories, defeated a British squadron off the coast of Chile after going around Cape Horn. And it was due to Canaris's brilliant disinformation of the signaling he gave from that ship that allowed the Germans to win that little battle down there off of South America. And Canaris then made his way back to Germany, ended up working as a spy in Spain and Italy during the war. An incredible career, Admiral Canaris, and he ended up being appointed head of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, I think 1935. He initially had a favorable opinion of Hitler, but he quickly, as a conservative German military officer, as an admiral, he understood that Hitler was bad. Now, his protege was Reinhard Heydrich, but he realized that Heydrich was also evil, and I think it was a big disappointment. He also was part of training Walter Schellenberg, and I think he became close to Schellenberg, and I think Schellenberg came to realize Nazism was evil even while he was an SS general, and that's why they didn't hang him at Nuremberg. He was sentenced. But what you had in Germany is you had these conservative intelligence people, mostly around Canaris, and then you had this crazy thing come up on the Nazi Party. You had Martin Bormann, and you had Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo, head of SS counterintelligence, and they turned out to be Soviet agents. Mm-hmm. And when you read Schellenberg's memoir, what you find is there's this battle he recounts during the war between the Soviet agents within German intelligence and Canaris's agents. And it's a battle for Hitler, and of course Hitler ends up siding with the Soviet agents, which is, I think, why Hitler made an agreement. I think there was a secret agreement between Hitler and Stalin at the end of the war. It may be the only real explanation if whether Hitler got out of the bunker or not. I'm neutral on that, because the testimony is so the witnesses are compromised and we don't know, but it ends up being that the Nazi diaspora, which is controlled by Müller and Bormann, becomes a communist intelligence operation afterwards. And this is, I had discussions with the late Pete Bagley over this, because he mentions it in his last book about him knowing about this. And of course, he had been, I believe, in the OSS in Switzerland early in his career before the CIA. He was a major leader in CIA counterintelligence. And, he brings this out, that a good portion of the Nazi diaspora ended up under Soviet control. And so when we see these right-wing groups today in Greece, the Golden Dawn, it's really a Nazi party. And we see it in Germany with the AfD, and we're seeing it in these rise of anti-Semitism in the MAGA right in America. We're seeing the same fingerprint of this control. I should point out that all of this anti-Semitism coming onto the right is promoted by the pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian
and I mean,
blog.
Of course, it's the professionalized anti-Semitism. The traditional conspiracy mythology. It's like a forever ghost chase, right? Because the American system. Is integrated. They have a central bank, they have big merchant banks, and they have large industry attached to that. They have politicians, and so there's like connections between all of these entities, it was chosen to have, it was decided to have, like, let's say, a Jewish person doing the job at the, let's say, Federal Reserve Central Bank, or it was at some point was decided when America was building up its war production, we need a reliable bank for organizational purposes. So they made, they went to Sidney, I think it was Sidney Weinberg at Goldman Sachs, and so the establishment decided, okay, we're going to use Goldman Sachs because they are reliable, and so, but then, if you twist it and if you tell people there's these windmills of Zion that took over Britain and took over America, and that the Anglos totally lost all the power and they didn't do anything, they just stood by while a handful of Jews took everything over. If you tell people that nonsense, then you think you see evidence everywhere, because everybody's in some way connected to large industry or major private banks or the central bank. You can you can claim anybody is working for the Zionist conspiracy if you want to pinpoint want to pin that on somebody. Now, if let's say if you are Russia and you have control over a certain politician, then you can tell all your assets, protect him. Don't say he works for the Jewish conspiracy. But if there's another politician who's against Russia, then the order is everybody must say that he works for the Jewish conspiracy because he has some loose connection to, let's say, a merchant bank or big industry and knows somebody from the central bank. And so you can selectively use that and say, oh, this is a friend and this is an enemy. And so we had this problem back then, total infiltration. Then people started to build up this new movement. It was already completely infiltrated. And now, as you just explained, we have the same stuff happening again.
Same dynamic.
What I have here is a German copy of Carol Quigley's book. It had the lamest title ever. I think the original title was called
Tragedy and Hope. Was the original.
This is the other book. This is the thinner
this is
book.
his other book. Yeah, no, that's not as thick. His other book is thicker.
Yeah, this was called The Anglo-American Establishment from Rhodes to Cliveden, and lamest title ever, but what he's really describing is, he says, there was this secretive group that didn't have a real name. Nobody was supposed to use a specific name. So he tries to approximate and say, well, he could tell that in that time frame it had these and these other members, and so the leader was that guy, so he calls it the Rhodes Group, or he calls it the Milner Group, named after Lord Milner, but he says it had no real name, not even for the members, and they had no headquarters, no fixed official headquarters. It was a very professional organization, very powerful, and he says it was this secretive British group that was instrumental in all this appeasement towards Hitler and the Nazis, even sabotaging France, which wanted to protect itself and the rest of Europe. And so it was, according to Quigley, and he makes a very serious argument here, according to him, this group allowed Hitler to rearm, to remilitarize the Rhineland.
Let me interject an important point. Isn't it what he says is that they were hoping that Germany and Russia would face off?
Well, he can never pinpoint a single document in that's ironclad and would give out the end-all be-all motivation for what this group did. So he can speculate, he can try to reconstruct, and there is some evidence that some members actually thought it would be a good idea to have Hitler start a war with the Soviets. But the group was not totally unified. It had an inner circle, it had an outer circle, It had new members, sometimes members left, new people came in. So there was like a compartmented structure within that organization. And but we know who the members were, and we know what they did, and we know how awfully it played out. Because in hindsight, it would have made sense to coordinate with the French and make a position clear. We will not tolerate a German war against a neighbor. And as long as the French were in on this protection scheme, the French could have been ready to intercept. So it wouldn't have made sense. It wouldn't have made sense for the Germans to get into Poland if their back is unprotected against the French. So instead of playing it safe and saying, okay, can we work out something reasonable, something peaceful? Can we just, play it safe? No, some people actually try to play with fire. Now, let's remind ourselves that Britain had also Britain had a massive problem with communist infiltration. Maybe there were some Russian assets or Soviet assets in Britain who were able to just tip the scale enough, just a little bit further for a specific time. Not total control, not necessarily total control over what Britain was doing, but just influence, tip the scale, and then when the other guys and the rest of the government figured out, okay, this is not going well, this is completely going off the rails, we're getting into some serious deep waters here, it was already too late it was too late to hit the brakes. And this is something that I think it has a parallel to today when we think of high-placed spies and moles in the West. They don't necessarily have full control over what, let's say, the German government is doing or the US government is doing, but they might have, in total, maybe enough influence to just tip the scale a bit over the finish line.
Policy in a direction.
A little bit in this direction.
With Harry Hopkins,
a little bit more.
With Harry Hopkins and the Soviet agents in the Roosevelt administration, they were definitely tilting it, and you can see it in the discussion that Schellenberg is hinting that Martin Bormann's influence over Hitler. You've got Canaris and the head of Foreign Armies East, Reinhard Gehlen, both discover that Martin Bormann is running secret transmitters in 1943, communicating with Moscow, sending coded traffic to Moscow. So they both go to Hitler and say, do you know that your deputy Martin Bormann is communicating to Stalin? And Hitler goes, oh yeah, that's my back channel to Stalin. And they were like dumbfounded.
Yeah.
You know, this is something Galen wrote about in his memoir. And of course, it confirms what Schellenberg was telling us about this Soviet circle of spies around Hitler nudging him in the direction of Stalin, so that at the end of the war, Hitler puts puts all his panzer divisions against the Americans and rips into the Americans, pulls so many troops off the Eastern Front that if you read the memoirs of the chief of the general staff, Heinz Guderian, he's saying, well, we're outnumbered 7-1 on the Eastern Front while we're doing this giant offensive, tearing into American divisions, splitting the American Army group under Bradley in half, to where Eisenhower and Bradley are in a state of panic. And how is this allowed? Well, this back channel that Reinhard Heydrich reports that Admiral Canaris and he discovered is obviously going on, because the whole Soviet army is stopped, and they're busy invading Romania, Bulgaria. They're moving in, linking up with Tito, but they're not pushing directly on Berlin when they could easily rip through the line. And you read my years with Eisenhower, my 3 years with Eisenhower, this naval liaison officer who wrote this detailed account of Eisenhower being the commander-in-chief in the West, and Eisenhower during the Battle of the Bulges writing fiercely, where are the Soviets? I'm being hammered here. Where's the Soviet offensive to relieve me? What's going on? Why am I taking on the whole German army, in December 1944 or early January 1944, and the Russians aren't moving at all? And the Russians are saying, oh, the weather's too bad. We can't move. We can't move. And when that battle is nearly over, I think it's around the 13th of January 1945, then the Soviets move, when the panzers have expended themselves on the Americans. And, Hitler's generals wanted him to pull the panzers behind the West Wall. They got this beautiful defensive line, the West Wall. They could pull the panzers out, put them to the Eastern Front. Oh, no, just let them stay there and grind out. And Patton was going to Eisenhower saying, oh, I can envelop these panzer divisions if they stay out by the West Wall. And Eisenhower goes, no, we're just going to grind them from the front. Because why? Because that's what General Marshall told him to do. And General Marshall's a whole other can of worms.
And so a traitor, somebody, let's say, a typical traitor story, and we have so many documented instances with all the files and everything. So there's like the typical traitor wants to have a big career. He's not smart enough, or he's not hardworking enough, or he just hasn't the right
General
connections.
General Marshall,
and he wants it so bad. He wants the status and the recognition and the fame and the money and the women or whatever he's into, but he just can't get it. and he has money problems.
He's a narcissist. The typical spy is a narcissist.
Yeah. And then so then comes help, a magic fairy in the form of a Russian asset, and they give you the first bit of help, and then they give you more help, and then
and you advance up the ladder.
Yeah, and at some point there may be even a traditional recruitment. You have to go to a specific place and sign documents and get like the first official payment, and you have to sign for the payment. But they will also coach you. They will have to train you in specific ways, and one of the ways they train these people is with the plausible deniability, the way they talk, how they justify what they say and what they do. And there's different categories of that training. Now, one category...
What's alarming is how this really fits in with Trump and some of the other West European leaders today.
Yeah, I mean, there's like one category...
Did you see what Angela Merkel said? That the Baltic states... What did she say? The Baltic states and Poland are responsible for the war in Eastern Europe. Did you hear her say that?
No, I haven't seen that yet.
What the heck?
Well, and here's the thing: one category of that training is about fake optimism, or pretending to be overly optimistic or kind of naive. So this is when, let's say back then, this is when people said. Well, there's like this power of commerce. If we trade enough with the Nazis, they will calm down. They will enjoy the money and the security, and so that will calm them. We're optimistic about that, and the Nazis they won't be so bad. We're very optimistic, and if we work with them, it's going to be a best option. So this is and the same stuff we saw when it came to Vladimir Putin, the same arguments, it's going to be fine. It's we're being optimistic here. It's don't listen to the naysayers, don't listen to the people who are always so negative. I'm positive, and there's this great future ahead of us. The second category is shared ideological ideas. Back then, segments of the US-UK establishment. Some people in the US-UK establishment admired aspects of fascism or pretended to admire aspects of fascism. The anti-communism, corporatism, eugenics, authoritarian order, blah, blah, blah. So this is also some plausible deniability stuff that's used today when it comes to Russia and increasingly China, where you say, well, they're all about their people and their ethnic group and Christianity, what they got over there, and being old school and not having this modern stuff that we don't like. So we have common ground. This is what people used back then as an explanation. This is what people use today as an explanation. And then there's the shadowy field of deliberate deception. Now, of course, if somebody says pro-Russian things and sometimes does pro-Russian things, in some rare cases, this person might not really be pro-Russia. This person might just be pretending it for operational purposes. It happens in rare cases. So you can never be 100% when it comes to somebody at face value, of course. But a traitor can also use a manipulator. A traitor can also use the deception argument. And back then, they could have said, oh, well, in the British establishment, like this Rhodes group or whatever, and some American groups, some of these traitors could have said in these closed-door meetings, you know what? How about we make Hitler feel safe? How about we pretend we like him, and we pretend we're in tune with this ideology, and we have a common enemy, and blah, 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 so the Germans feel more safe than they really are. And maybe we can get some of our American friends to play along with this deception and pretend to be friends with Hitler. Meanwhile, they are very observing of what's happening in Europe, and Americans are willing to jump into action if the necessity arises. So, some people really tried deception and it failed. This is what Mr. Quigley is accusing this group of, that they thought they were smarter and they thought they would They would be smart in their deception against the Germans, but then it backfired. But also a traitor, in some closed door or private meetings, a traitor would also use that argument. Oh no, I'm not selling out to the Nazis, or I'm not selling out really to the Russians. I'm not really selling out to Putin. No. This is a bit of deception. It's just a bit of strategic blah, blah, blah. I want them to feel safe, and that makes me so professional and everything. So this is also something that a line that somebody who's a traitor might use internally to hide the treason, to have an alternative explanation that sounds somewhat reasonable. And if you have enough traitors and you repeat these three categories of arguments long enough, you can tip the scales here, over there, over there, over there. And it's not just one guy who's visibly doing that. It's multiple guys. It's many guys. It's here, it's there, it's everywhere, and it's harder to pinpoint. So that's why it's important. That's why it's important to draw these parallels, because in essence, espionage hasn't changed. Just subversion hasn't really changed all that much. And if you get into these extreme circles, if you get into the truther circles, you will experience crazy. If you get into a group, if you spend enough time in that group, you will meet the insanity. You will meet famous people who are incompetent, who just progressed because of their contacts, who got famous because of their contacts. It's like I'm worried about people that I see, people with a large audience. I'm worried about Alex Jones. I'm worried about Tucker Carlson. I'm worried about a bunch of other people, because most of the time they're not even handsome. They're not particularly smart. They've never had an original thought in their lives, as far as I can see. And they're kind of dysfunctional, some more than others. But they got famous. Sometimes they got really, really, really famous. With Jones, for example, all the stuff that people said who used to work for him or used to be married to him or just partied with him or whatever, it's concerning. It's really concerning to me. It's really scary. And Jones would even claim that he had some, early on he had some military contacts, people in the military who liked him, and they kind of supported him and brought him to the next stage. He said that in public on more than one occasion. And it's that what I'm worried about. It's like a backdoor into America, just like there was a backdoor into Britain, so that the Russians could come in, or their assets could come in, because if you have points of entry, if you have a point of entry and you can get into America, or you can get into Britain, you can open up more doors for other people, and you can give opportunities to specific people that you are helping along, that you can control. You're helping their careers while you sabotage other people's careers. There's always something for every person who becomes powerful and famous for no apparent logical reason. For every person that becomes famous, there's multiple other people who fail, who don't get the chance, who don't get the these opportunities and the contacts and the airplay, so to say. This is like when Carroll Quigley became really concerned, and he was writing from the perspective of an Anglo man. He said he loves the Anglosphere. He's really committed, and he's so positive about it, but he's agreeing with the usual goals, but he's concerned about the methods, and he's concerned about specific individuals who made decisions that turned out to be horrendously wrong. And so just to give people a quick example of how big these mistakes were. it was as bad as you can make it. The Chamberlain group, Neville Chamberlain's people, they were this circle was full of people from this secretive organization that Carroll Quigley writes about. He calls it the Milner Group or the Rhodes Group or whatever, but it had no real name. It had no real headquarters. It was supposed to be super secret. And so they talk about, they talk about the sabotaging of France, and there was also a sabotaging of Poland, and this I think becomes painfully clear in Louis Kilser's book called Churchill's Deception, because these Brits who would pretend to be friendly with the Nazis, they visited the Nazis, and the Nazis wanted to impress their guests. They would show them secret information and secret plans and talk about, in 1936, the determination to attack Poland in the very near future. And showing some preparations and just trying to get, these Germans wanted to impress the British and ensure them that this was all in the benefit of all the Nordic countries, all the Nordic people, and Germany had no intention of messing with Britain or Britain's colonies or the Americans. This would all work itself out. But there was serious intelligence that Germany was about to attack Poland, years before it happened, and the French. I mean, there was information about, what would happen with the French, or the French didn't get that help. The French wanted a multinational coalition to contain Germany, but the French didn't get that. The French didn't get that support because this secretive British organization sabotaged it. Because somebody believed it would be smart to have Hitler fight with the Soviets, and or maybe there wasn't even somebody who thought this was the smartest plan. Maybe these were traitors, high-placed traitors in Britain. And it goes back to the same stuff over and over again that we talked about earlier on the show. I mean, even a guy like Lord Louis Mountbatten, who had a communist wife and was like from the inner royal family, Lord Louis Mountbatten was exposed as a complete pedophile. I mean, even the latest books by respected historians say, based on ever new evidence, that Mountbatten was not just gay, but he liked the young guys, the young cadets from the military institutions. And that was his lifestyle. And he had a communist wife. And he started to say strange things that started to worry British intelligence, French intelligence, American intelligence. The FBI opened a file on Mountbatten and his wife. And people started to notice that whatever Mountbatten touched started to go downhill, and things started to benefit the USSR. I mean, especially when Mountbatten's close friend became the first Secretary General of NATO. And then they messed up Egypt, they messed up India, and always the USSR benefited. So it's like this group that Quigley describes here as best as he could, this group was essentially, on the surface, any right-winger's dream. There was, it was as conservative and right-wing and establishment as possible. So people would have, people who are strictly ideological, they would have loved that group. They would have just played along with that group, or they would have just kept that group secret. And it's just, according to standard ideological principles, it was perfect. Utterly perfect. You couldn't make it any more conservative on the surface. But it led to massive, massive problems. And even this German guy, this Erich Ahrens guy, who's now saying he wants to bring down the right-wing AfD party and all that. Even this Erich Ahrens guy, I mean, this Erich Ahrens guy, he once said while he was, I think he was secretly recorded, he once said that he received significant money from an American who was also financing this pseudoscientific eugenics group, which had a backstory with an older eugenics group which had ties to this Cold Spring Harbor eugenics record office. So this was like the crowd that did some eugenics experiments in the US, and the same American crowd who was very popular with the Nazis for a while. So this is also something that people should remember.
And also, Margaret Sanger and this whole eugenics movement in the U.S., you got people like Hillary Clinton and people on the left in the U.S. that are Margaret Sanger fans. This is Planned Parenthood in the United States. Margaret Sanger started it because she didn't want Black Americans to reproduce. She wanted to encourage birth control, family control among blacks, not among whites. This is the story, the scandal that the left doesn't want told. The linkages between the Nazis and the communists in these areas of eugenics are rather interesting.
Yeah, so
given that there's this belief in Darwin and Darwinism.
Yeah, so what happened was, this was around the year 1900, and there's a very good book on this. It's called, this book is called War Against the Weak, Eugenics and America's Campaign to Create a Master Race. This is from the Jewish historian Edwin Black. He's also the author of the very good study called IBM and the Holocaust. And so what happened back then...
He also, by the way, he wrote the book on the transfer agreement, with the secret agreement that Nazis had with the Zionists to try to move Jews from Europe into Palestine, which kind of failed.
Well, that's the one that I haven't read yet. I have IBM and the Holocaust, and I have War Against the Weak, and he describes the insanity that went on around the year 1900. Now, this was not all over America. This was kind of a sandbox, a sizable sandbox experiment, where some of these people in powerful positions, they got enthralled with especially British eugenics, and so they thought, well, maybe we can use that. And to be fair, even social democrats were in on the trend in Europe. I mean, it's places like Sweden, the left.
It's very non-Christian. You know, if you think about it, Christians believe in love, and they believe that everybody matters. And
this is
God,
what people don't remember.
Everybody, doesn't matter what your IQ is, but these people want to breed. It's like you don't want ordinary people to be street sweepers and do all these simple jobs. You want everybody to be a genius. What is this?
Yeah, and so
I don't understand.
even the left, even social democrats in Europe were, for a time, were very infatuated with the idea of eugenics. And so some powerful people in America, they tried to identify what they thought was the lowest 10% of society, if possible, sterilize them, and then move on to the next lowest 10% of the population.
Horrific things done to American black people under this sterilization of young black women.
They would even grab people, just regular white people from outside of the big cities, and they were poorer, and they would subject them to these phony IQ tests back then. They were really just garbage back then. They would ask all kinds of city questions, cultural questions. What's this? What's that? And so when these poor white kids or these poor young people, these poor young white people would score low on these tests, they were declared so stupid that they shouldn't breed, and oftentimes under pretenses they were sterilized. And so this was kind of a very sick experiment in a limited American sandbox, and so this was also a reason why the Germans and Nazis thought they had enough friends in America because of that eugenics. And so
and of course, the German doctors in Nazi Germany, and you had the doctors' trial after the war, really liked a lot of this stuff. And this is why many of them, the medical profession, went along with this Hitler's idea of getting rid of retarded people. They had this, what was it? Was it 80,000 disabled and retarded people that they basically murdered?
Yeah, there
Am
was
I remembering the numbers right?
different programs, and sometimes you could be denounced by your own family because you had a hearing problem. I think that was somebody in my family. He had a like a congenital hearing defect or acquired hearing defect or something, and so he was not liked by somebody in the family. So he got reported, and they came and took him and killed him. So that's what that was.
This is just so tragic.
And so this young extremist, this young German extremist, this Erich Ahrens, he claimed once he got serious money from a guy who was tied to the Human Diversity Foundation. And the Human Diversity Foundation, they publish these studies talking about IQ and race and blah blah blah. So they try to appear very scientific, but it's all kind of like a smoke screen for the old stuff.
What year were they operating? What year was this?
Well, the Human Diversity Foundation is fairly recent, but the older iteration of that group was called the Pioneer Fund. And this was kind of a very elitist organization. One of the founders was Harry Laughlin. Harry Laughlin, he was a director of the eugenics record office in the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, Long Island, New York. So these were the serious people who actually did eugenics in practice. And so this is kind of the scene you're getting into. Even today, if you're getting into this regular conspiracy stuff and the race question and the pro-Russian stuff and the Dugin stuff.
You're opening the door to this, aren't you? Well, and then
you're moving on thin ice here.
They're connecting up with transhumanism. I mean, we were talking about an American of German origin, Peter Thiel, who's a homosexual. Funny thing, they're into all these different, dark enlightenment and futuristic kind of things. If we're going to go to robotization, what do we need all these low IQ people for, kind of thing? And you hear about this transhumanism. It was that French pro-Russian alt-right guy who wrote Archaeofuturism. What was it? Fay, right? Yami Fay?
Yeah, one of these guys.
Right? And there's a lot of transhumanist stuff in there that's very frightening, right? So that you go from eugenics to transhumanism, where we're going to make a super race. We're going to play with the human genome like we can be God, right? We can actually improve the human race by tinkering with the genetics. This is very scary because I don't think any of these people know what they're doing or talking about. And you've got ontological, philosophic, theological questions about this. And of course, it's the science. No, science is scientific experts. Today's experts are tomorrow's fools because they don't know what they claim they know. We saw this with the whole vaccine regime, and Desmet in his book on the psychology of totalitarianism goes into how everybody got it wrong. I mean, these scientific establishments in the West, they're just corrupt bureaucrats who don't know what they're doing. And they just call it science, but then they've got their own agendas. The same thing's going to go on with this, by the way, when you get back to eugenics and you get to transhumanism. They're going to make a mess.
If you're an angry young man, white man in the West. Okay, so what do you got? You don't own anything. You don't have any control. Well, you have your biology, and this is what then these circles they wanna capitalize on that. So they say, okay, so you're part of a group. You're already part of a brotherhood, a society based on your biology, and so now they will explain to you that you have the best genetics, and then there's these other people that have really evil, terrible genetics, and those with the lesser genetics, they want to destroy the people with the better genetics, and it's all like this very simplistic simplistic line of thinking.
The white replacement theory? Are you including that in that?
Demographics have always changed, oftentimes through violence and through programs.
War, immigration, invasion.
Usually, if you become a minority, and this has happened in the past, if a majority becomes a minority, they get treated like minorities usually get treated, which is very bad, very badly. Yeah. So of course, you have to have some understanding of a group dynamic, based on not just ethnicity, but also many other things. And it's like
really this has been the Russians doing in Europe. I mean, I've studied this about the African and Middle Eastern movements of people into Europe, the left and the Russians and the KGB. I mean, the Russian mafia, the Turkish mafias, the people connected always with Russian connected. This is, this million Muslims who was 2014 moved into the heart of Europe. There's a Russian fingerprints all over this.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if you are young, let's say a young white man, right? So if you want to surround yourself in a political sense, friendship sense with other men, and you want to find a suitable woman, what are you looking for? Is it just the skin pigmentation? Is it just their ethnic background? There's so many more things that come into that, and you have to be aware of all the damage that's been done to white people, or done to white people by white people, or done to white people by other people. So there's this damage all around. Especially we Germans, we should understand that problem. We should understand that problem because we've had these extreme demographic changes. For example, we had, before the two world wars, we had a high degree of Jewish people or Jewish German people. Sometimes they didn't even follow their religion anymore. Sometimes they were already intermarried for two generations with Germans. So we had a German Jewish part of the population, and we killed them all. Then so many young men, some very capable young men, or some many capable men died in the First World War, and then more people died in the Second World War. And every time there is starvation, or there's very little food, especially during pregnancies, that can cause lasting damage. Or there's trauma.
Yes,
there's trauma during pregnancy. There's trauma during pregnancy. There's trauma during pregnancy. There's trauma after birth that can all change how you are, and certain
it can
problems
even be passed on to the second generation.
And also back then, when the industrialization really kicked in, especially the war production, nobody cared about worker safety with all the chemicals, radiation.
Oh, chemical exposure, yes.
All that stuff. And everybody was smoking. I mean, we Germans were smoking like factory stacks. I mean, we were smoking like crazy and drinking alcohol like crazy, damaging our genetics. And then we had children, and they had children. So there's already significant damage being done. So nobody should fool themselves. Of course, you need to be picky whom you're friends with. Of course, you need to be very picky whom to marry and have children with. And it's like it's not evil per se to have a preference and say, okay, I like the Nordic type, or I think that's pleasing to me if we have, 5-6 Nordic looking children, and we have a certain way of life, and we love to see that on a larger scale. That's not evil per se, but don't think somebody is healthy just because he looks like you, or he says the things that you think make this person a friend. You have to be aware of the actual science and the pitfalls and the individual.
Well, there was a controversial book here in the U.S. called The Bell Curve. It was talking about the intelligence curve, and intelligence testing, and it was what was the author's name? Was it Murray? I'm not remembering the author's name, but one of the things that you see in it is that white Americans have this bell curve that has these long tails. So the dumbest people are white people, and the smartest people are white. I mean, the people way out here that are, super geniuses. So in the white European genetic background, you have a larger number of people who are really dumb and really super genius. Whereas you go to the bell curve of Japanese, and their average intelligence is higher than the average American IQ. They don't have these curves, so they don't have as many super geniuses or idiots. They're more in the middle, in the intelligent middle. And I think North Chinese, it's the same. Africans, it's the same. You don't have these extremes, and maybe it's because there were more different genetic groups in Europe that allowed for more variation. I don't know how that history formed, but it was interesting. It was very controversial in what it meant, and of course, on the right, where these eugenics kind of theories came out, you had people talking about this, some kind of natural disposition of the Nordic types to accept other people or whatever, and it's bad. It's what's allowed the Arabs and the Africans to come into Europe, but the issue is really very, when you get into the math of it, it's very complicated. And what I like is what Carl Jung said, and he said that, look, statistics are wrong. And I think you go to von Mises and you go to Max Weber, the proper methodology in the social sciences is individualistic. Jung said, look, people are individuals. You have to understand them as individuals, because that's where the seat of consciousness is in the individual. There's no collective mind, and every individual is different. And if you use a statistic and you use averaging, you're gonna misrepresent. Let's say you have a bunch of NBA basketball players and a bunch of pygmies, and the average height is 5'11" or whatever. That's not. Then there's nobody anywhere near that height in this group. They're all way taller or way shorter. Right? So you're going to go, oh, the statistic is this is what they are. And it's nothing like what they are.
Yeah.
So the statistics just don't really tell you the truth.
Yeah. And you see stuff online. I mean, there's two examples here. One is, when people get into this extreme right-wing cult, and then they show stuff on Twitter or X, and it's like a montage of white excellence, the palaces that had been built, or the grandiose monuments, or specific instances of scientific breakthroughs. And so there's this montage, and this is supposed to prove the white power superiority. And then they say, well, look at what these other civilizations have built. They don't come even close, blah blah blah. Okay, so remember what it took to build these palaces, and to what the basic was for that. Where did the money come from? The money for these grandiose palaces came from peasant serfs. So these were white people. This went on in Germany until like the 1800s. Some people, some specific places in Germany, they ended serfdom in the later 1700s. Some places ended in the early 1800s. But before that, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, about 90% of people, white people, about 90% of people were peasant serfs. And so a peasant serf,
farmers who did not own their land and were taxed by
not
the
exactly a slave, but somewhat close, because you only had very limited rights. I mean, you were not a complete
you couldn't
object.
leave. You couldn't leave your property. You couldn't give up your job or anything.
So farm work, pretty much 7 days a week, all year round. You had to work, pay all these taxes, and if you complained, you got into trouble. And so this system, for a very long time, they try to extract the smart people from the population. So if they got better and better at that, these European empires, they kind of figure out that even among the peasants were some geniuses, so we have to find them and bring them into our realm and make use of them. But so they were extracting geniuses from the population. some really spectacular folks over time, but they extracted them from the regular population, so they were missing in the regular population. And sometimes, or for a long time, these geniuses were not even discovered by the elites. They had to be silent. They had to play along and be like everybody else. Or if they spoke up and showed they were being smart, they were asking questions, they were viewed as very suspicious. It was very, very dangerous to be smart for a long time, because if you questioned the serf system, the exploitation, and being called up for wars that you didn't understand, and the religious laws that wanted to govern everything, and they were just hunting for the dissenters. I mean, some really harsh and nonsensical rules oftentimes, and just questioning, is the earth flat or is it not flat? It was dangerous to be smart. I mean, smart people were, in danger, and
they had to be part of the system in order to not be persecuted.
Yeah. And so if it was beneficial to your safety on average if you were average, or at least appeared average, if you spoke like everybody else, if you were considerably boring, not a threat to anybody. And so, yeah, I mean, some people.
I think it's still that way today.
Yeah, and it's like this was like this was
getting promoted.
All imperialism. I mean, all imperialism had this problem. The Muslims did it. Because they copied everybody else's imperialism. All the other empires did it. The Golden Horde, then this empire, that empire. They all needed a serf system to function, but that was like a huge eugenics program, right? Because you forced all kinds of people to do farming work, even though there were smart people, really smart people among those farmers, and you should have been using them for something else. You should have cultivated that, but this wasn't done. So this was like a huge eugenics experiment that went on for a long time. Then you had the big wars, World War I, World War II. We never really recuperated from this demographic damage. We lost the Jews because we killed them all. So that was a tremendous demographic
among
loss.
some of the smartest people in the country.
they some of them escaped and basically made the A-bomb.
Made the atomic bomb, yeah.
Made the A-bomb, invented a bunch of other things, and so we lost them because we killed them all, or almost all of them. We never recuperated. We never recuperated demographically. And if you see some of these old photos of Jews being photographed before they were sent to a camp or just shot and fell into a ditch, a lot of these photographs, I mean, you can tell some of these people, they wanted to be totally Jewish. They wanted to just marry somebody who was totally Jewish and a firm believer. And some people, they chose otherwise, and they married some German. Yeah. And then they look different. Some of these people on these photos, they look absolutely distinctly German, but they still got labeled a Jew because the Nazis were so paranoid. They think the clock was ticking because of all this assimilation that went on before. They thought they were losing track of who is a Jew and who has these devilish genetic traits, or these inherent traits. So they were losing track of the conspiracy. They could be everywhere and you couldn't see them. So they went crazy on the databases. They had these punch card tabulation machines from Hollerith /IBM. So they calculated. They had all the data and they calculated whom to kill. And so this was so this was based on something that was thought to be science. They thought, and this went on even 50 years before there were any Nazis.
Yeah, I should tell a story here to illustrate what you're talking about. When I was in high school, we had a substitute teacher. She was a German Jew, and she and her brother, I think her parents died in the Holocaust, but she and her brother pretended to be German Aryan because she had blue eyes. She was Jewish. She had blue eyes and blonde hair. And her brother had blue eyes and blonde hair. He joined the Wehrmacht. And I think he died in the fighting, but he got away with it. I don't know if he got circumcised or how he got himself so he could hide himself. But there were quite a few. If a Jewish person had Aryan characteristics and could hide his Jewish background, they could just blend in to the German population.
Yeah, and so it's like for generations there had been this idea that this idea in the right wing that Jewish people had the worst genetics, or they didn't necessarily call it genetics back then, but they call it like inherent traits that were passed on. So they were supposedly Jews had this mixture of traits that made them the biggest danger for any classic empire. So Jews supposedly destroyed Rome because of their genetic, makeup. Jews supposedly destroyed multiple other empires, and there was no other reason why these empires fell.
And this is right out of Mein Kampf, where he says there's three kinds of races: culture destroying races, culture preserving races, and culture creating races. And he lists the Jews as the culture destroying race, right?
Yeah, and so then
that's what Hitler does.
And so then somebody commented on our last video, I think it was the last video, and he asked in the comments, "Oh, are you familiar with the books from? Was it Kevin B. MacDonald? Was it somebody else? Some guy who?"
Oh yes, I've read MacDonald's. The culture. What is his book? Is the Culture of Critique? I think is his book.
Yeah, something about some. Yeah, it's this thing about the Jews having specific traits and
that they create. They do this for the culture, and it's amazing that MacDonald is really taking this idea out of Mein Kampf, and then he's trying to prove it.
Yeah, some evolutionary development, some evolutionary development that made the Jews so destructive. When I'm thinking, okay, let's do a basic plausibility test. I mean, Semites. I mean, there was the whole area of Mesopotamia, all kinds of empires and different empires, and they all functioned the same. All
the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Phoenicians,
all worked the same. All of that worked the same.
They were all Semites.
And all these
part
empires,
of the same genetic pool.
And all these empires that came and went, some very big, some middle-sized, some very small, all these empires, they experimented with this idea of making everybody kind of similar, having this common identity, making gods specifically for that crowd and that target audience. And some groups or subgroups, they had to figure out ways to, survive and maybe have some of their own identity. And there were many, 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 many groups in the Roman Empire and other empires, many groups that tried to stay among themselves somewhat, try to protect their identity somewhat and be somewhat different. But there's no real rhyme or reason to it. Nobody developed these super characteristics that made them super spies or super damaging. I mean, even on a smaller scale, everybody had to play the imperial game, and the Jews were no exception. I mean, they had these two states that were sometimes even at war with each other, and they were not so different from many other smaller groups. So why would that
were a smaller breakoff group from the Babylonians and the Phoenicians and the Assyrians? They were all Semitic people. That's what people don't understand. So where is the culture destruction? The Semites that moved into Mesopotamia brushed aside the Sumerians, the original race that created the civilization in the Fertile Crescent, and they thrived for thousands of years in that area. And who's going to say that Assyria and Babylonia were not culturally civilized, or certainly the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians? Carthage had a republic. I mean, you look at someone like Hannibal. The abilities of the Phoenicians as seafarers and the kind of maritime culture they created, which of course passed on to the Carthaginians, these were Semitic peoples. What, are they culture destroyers like the Jews? This theory is just plain nonsense. And for MacDonald, by the way, I read critically as a trained social science person. I was in a PhD program. I studied methodology in social science. Methodology is all wrong. He is not proving anything. This is tendentious polemics.
Yeah, it sounds to me like there are people out there who believe classic conspiracy mythology first, and then try to create some underpinning, some pseudoscientific underpinning, because they're already starting with the conclusion. They have a fixed view already, and then they just look to find something that seems to prop up this conclusion that they already had beforehand. And it's like, and sometimes, and when I disagree and say I don't take this seriously, then I think in the comment section the question arose, well, don't you take biology seriously? Well, I'm not a Marxist. Yeah, I understand biology is very important. It's not like we're all blank slates and the state or whatever, or culture just entirely make who we are.
They're learning things in genetics. The genetics are malleable, and there's all kinds of changes. You look at you feed a group of people a different diet. Look at the Japanese. Now we've got tall Japanese. When they get a better diet, when they get the American diet, they actually change. Yeah. And so you go to the Congo and you say, well, why is the average IQ in the Congo like 70 or whatever it is, 75? Because their diet. These people are so poor that, and what happens to the brain when the mom, like you say, in pregnancy. And then there's the cultural biases and IQ tests that you've pointed out. You've got Australian Aborigines, for example, who have the lowest tested IQ among the different ethnic groups in the world. They go out there in that Australian desert, and a European is dead out there. There's no way they're going to survive. And these people can survive out there, right? So you're saying they're stupid? They've got something else going for them, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's
so it's not all so simple,
Yeah, and so what I oftentimes see is that some people, they value words a lot more than actions. So let's say there's a person who agrees with some radical thing they found on the internet about biology, for example. It happened quite a few times. Somebody will claim to be much better than me, because that other person has these convictions, right? But then I say, okay, but doesn't it count? Doesn't it count that that I'm married and I have raised 2 great kids, and by the way, I have blue-green eyes. My wife has blue-green eyes. She was so blonde for the first 10 years of her life, and both of my kids were super blonde. I mean, super blonde for many years, and they all got blue-green eyes. I mean, it's not like I married an Aborigine here. Okay, so how can you pretend to have how can you pretend or to how can you justify this ideology when you don't when you only have words at this point, and not even it doesn't even make much sense, but I get a lot of critique for not following along some ideology, and people tend to forget that I raised 2 kids in my own ethnic group, right? I mean, it's like this cross between Nordic, German, and a dash of South, even a little bit more to the south. You can almost draw a line here in Europe. It's that a bit of Roman, German, and far Nordics, and that's just many people here. Suddenly that doesn't count anymore, right? I mean, it's like it's crazy when you hear people like that and say, "Oh, you're bad because you don't follow my ideology, and biology doesn't matter to you." And I'm like, "Well, doesn't that count?"
There's obviously, if you have the biology of a chicken, you're going to lay eggs, and you're going to have a beak, right? And you're going to have feathers. So biology does matter, but among human beings, yeah, of course it matters, because people inherit traits, like you say, blue eyes, blonde hair, whatever. They do inherit them, but the human soul and the human mind and human culture, these things are very complex. And of course, the idea of valuing people strictly by certain intellectual ability or physical traits, look, human beings adapt. They change over generations. You look at what they looked at when they had a certain diet and a certain way of life, and then you look at them later. So it's not such a simple thing. Yes, of course, it's a factor, but there's a materialism in the genetic thing, in the Darwinian thing. That is ontological materialism. And by the way, science is moving towards disproving materialism as an understanding of, the ontology of materialism is that matter is the primary substance of the universe, and that mind is an epiphenomenon. That is, your mind is the epiphenomenon of the chemical reaction in your brain, and that everything's determined by your genetics, so that therefore your whole life is just already written. It's a cause and effect out of your genetics. And so they take it to this point of saying, look, these genetics produce good effects, these produce bad. So, and it's very simplistic. So we want to eliminate these people because we only want good effects.
And it's
this is materialist ontology and positivism. It's evil.
Yeah,
because man is a spiritual being.
Yeah, I can make a conscious choice, right? Like I made the choice of doing a show, recording a show, instead of just drinking beer. I mean, I could have been drinking beer for the last 2 hours, right? I could have been just drinking beer.
It'd be very German of you too.
Yeah, and it would have been. I could have been drinking with other people.
It's October. Oktoberfest is now.
And that would have been easier than recording a show or writing a book or doing this. But I make conscious choices that already have changed the course that other people were on. There's a certain effect, and other people have done that as well, and that changed me, or that gave me a bigger awareness of options. It's like okay, I have a certain set of genetics, and a certain upbringing that are some determining factors or some, let's say, limiting factors. I'm not going to be a professional basketball player,
right?
With my height, okay, but the influence we have on others can have the greatest consequences, and there's chain reactions of consequences, right? So some people call it the butterfly effect.
The whole reason we discuss things, the whole reason why we have these discussions, is to get people to think and to present information. No, we're not right all the time, but we get people thinking. We get a discussion. We maybe perfect something, and something good comes out of it down the line.
Yeah, and it's like also it's a continuous, let's call it grind. I mean, you see all kinds of living organisms repeating things, doing things over and over again, and it's like we humans, we have been influenced by culture to think that we're just going to wait for the chosen one. We're going to wait for a Führer or a new super political, mega leader, right? We're just going to wait for the
Eurasianists under Dugin. They're going to create the Götterdämmerung.
And you have to wait for this magic movement that's going to happen all of a sudden, and then the stars supposedly align, and then all these great transformations are possible. But in reality, it's not just about doing something once, being the chosen one and then doing the magic thing and defeating evil, at the end of the novel or at the end of the movie. It's about repetition. It's about all these things that we do. I mean, if the work that you do, or if you have children, then of course there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of grind. There's a lot of effort. And it may not seem like heroic efforts. It may not seem like something that's out of a movie, but it's this repetition. It's this grind that has a tremendous effect, and it's the willingness to be uncomfortable, and it's the willingness to
suffer.
the ability to suffer and the willingness to suffer to create something and help others along to create something.
And it
something
really
bigger.
is suffering. If you've ever written or done it, created anything, it's real suffering.
Yeah, oh man, it's something. It's like it's something. And and it's like it's this has a tremendous effect. And I mean, you see when you have kids, they have a mixture of your traits, the other parent's traits, and sometimes there's new combinations going on, or there's traits
and
that
they learn from their parents. You're their primary examples. You're the giant beings that surround them when they're babies.
I see some of me and my daughter. I see some of me and my son. I see some things from my wife and the kids, but there's also unique things that happen, and unique things that are part of who they are. And so, I do take biology seriously. I mean, I'm aware that every organization that's ever been successful has been selective. I mean, you have to be picky, right? I mean, and we tend to be picky with, some people are very picky with their beer. Of course, we are selective, and not everybody can play in the grand orchestra because it has to be really, really good. If you're not selective enough, the orchestra is going to sound like crap. And so, I recognize biology. It's not like it's not a yes or no question. It's not as simple as that. But when I say, I understand biology, I take biology seriously, that doesn't mean I'm with these ideological crazies that value words more than anything else in the world, and think they're superior because they copied and pasted some words, but they will not respect me in any way, even though I have married in my own ethnic group and we have 2 children that are new people in our ethnic group, and they will not respect that, and which is crazy. I mean, even according to their own standards, that's crazy. It's so many things that you do, and there's something like, if you're willing to grind, that's when surprises happen. This is when you increase the probability of something cool happening, something meaningful happening, and you have to create the ability to just maintain strength or increase strength, even though you're grinding, even though you're burning the candle at both ends sometimes, and just try to be inspiring, try to do something for other people, and it's not all determined. I think all the problems, all the major problems in the world are ultimately solvable. I think just from a very scientific from a scientific standpoint or from any other standpoint, I think it's all fixable. It's something that we can do as a species. I mean, look at what we've done so far. It's not all bad. It's not just all war and destruction and stupidity and craziness. I mean, we've done some outrageous things, but oftentimes when there's something new, and something really cool and new, it may take decades to be recognized and picked up by others. I mean, I've seen that so many times in history. There's even the most powerful business people have admitted this on video, and they said, if you have a concept, a ready to roll concept for something really cool and really new, nobody gives a crap about it at first. It's going to take quite a while until people pick up and say, oh my God, this is cool. This is important. Let's do this. There's quite a while when nobody pays any attention. And so even when it's about, when it's about the Russian threat or the combined Russian and Chinese threat, I mean, you stuck to the mission, Jeff. You stayed on the mission. And you even had an influence, a very early influence on me. You were part of a basket of influences that determined the rest of my life. And you never knew that before we even, talk to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how it works. I mean, it's not all, simplistic, deterministic. We're just stupid little, robots or cows standing on the field. We're capable of so much more, but it takes grind, and it takes the willingness to be unpopular oftentimes, and it takes the willingness to...
Well, you look at my favorite Greek philosopher, Socrates, a guy that went around with an old dirty, a shawl and barefooted, wouldn't get shoes, who basically liked to discuss serious things with people and became so unpopular they executed him. They made him drink hemlock. But it was his toughness, and he had this personal toughness, his willingness to grind out these discussions and confront people over do you really know what you think you know? Are you really telling the truth? Is this really, philosophy means love of wisdom. Is this really wise? Inspired people like Plato and Aristotle, who gave us modern science, gave us philosophy, gave us the intellectual tools that modern civilization is basically based on now. It all goes back to the people who were influenced by Socrates initially. And again, he has those traits, exact traits that you're describing, that willingness. And he didn't write any books. He just influenced people who did.
Yeah.
He just talked to people.
And so this is kind of, I think this would be the important message here for people out there. People out there who are grinding every day, their job, families, and all of that, do not stray from a good course, because there's so many people who want to lure you away from a good course. They lure you through fear or potential gain. They say there's a shortcut. Yeah, there's such a cool shortcut here. You gotta go here, and then take the shortcut. Yeah. Or, oh no, don't go that way. It's gonna lead to your doom. We have this special other way that you can try. You have to figure out ways to make things better for yourself and for others, and don't make mistakes. Avoid. It's a daily...
Intellectual integrity is saying, is this really true? How do I know it's true? And if I don't, then maybe I need to question it more.
Yeah, it's like grinding people can be extremely creative, and they can be turned into a very destructive force, right? Because this is what Erik Ahrens described, when he had his epiphany, right? When this former German super right winger, he said that it was
if it's a tough road, if he's trying to
it was almost a religious. I mean, at first when he got into the extremism, it said it was like a religious liberating experience. He was almost high. Finally he understands the world, and he understands good and evil, and
the dopamine rush.
Yeah, it was so addictive, he said, but then the effect. The effect was waning off, and he needed a stronger dose, so he had to go in more and more and more and more. It was his drug, and now he still appears to be grinding. He was grinding it as a super right winger. Now he's grinding it as an anti right winger. It looks like he's going to make some more mistakes. I think if he had listened to my stuff, I think he would avoid even more mistakes, or he could avoid a lot of more mistakes in the future. We'll see, but he seems to be grinding along so far. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Well, we've gone a long time. I think this is a good place to stop. And a discussion of intellectual integrity and philosophy is the key thing, because we want to be honest. We want to tell the truth. We want to find the truth. We all make mistakes. We all have to go, wait a minute, I was wrong about this. I got to rethink this. This is the most important thing, because if we're always sticking to some ideological line, some titillation, if we never have a course correction, we'll never be on the right course, ever. So this has been Friends and Enemies. And of course, we're looking for the real story about who the enemies of the West are, who our friends are, domestic and foreign enemies. And my co-host has been uh, why am I having a Alex Benesch, and who am I?
A tired man who's been working straight for his family and his mission for decades on end. A very tired.
I can't remember my own name now.
Very tired man.
But yes, it's been more than 2 hours, and my brain is fried. So, without any further ado, thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll join us next week for another discussion.